everybody. Hello, and welcome to another weekly webinar here at Route Consultant. For those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Josh Gregory, and I help lead the education team here at Route Consultant. So all that means for you is if you're a new buyer looking to get into the space, that we are here to help provide education so that you can figure out if it's the right space for you or not, and that current contractors can continue to come here to learn about new updates hitting the industry and find ways to continue to be successful in whatever climate FedEx puts us in. Now, before I go too much longer, I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer, as I always do, that I kind of have to read. So, Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. So all that being said, for everyone who comes to these every week, welcome back. And just so if you haven't been here before, to kind of get an understanding of the flow of today, is that in just a second, we will go over some content, and then I'll go over the new events, new listings that have come out this week, and then we will have an open Q&A. So it can be anything about the FedEx industry as a whole, anything we talk about today, any questions allowed here. We will answer them. My only ask for you is that if you do have those questions, make sure you put it in the Q&A at the bottom. If you put it in that button, I'll see it. If you put it somewhere else, I might see it. So if you want your questions answered, make sure you put it in that Q&A button. Now, for everyone who's here, just so you kind of understand what we're going to be talking about today, many of you are probably new investors that are still deciding between pickup and delivery and line haul as you think about which one is the best option to get into the space. Others of you may actually be P&D contractors right now who are trying to decide if line haul might be the right next step for you. And so wherever you are, we wanted to take today to focus on some critical pros and cons of the line haul side of this space to really help make that decision easy for you and so that you can help identify if this is the right industry for you based on your skill sets. So to do that, we've brought Alex Froome back on to help with the discussion. We've introduced him a couple of times. If you've never seen him before, never met him, Alex is a line haul contractor across the country, has different runs, teams, solos, all kinds of things. So he's seen all of this over the years. So we've decided, and we've got Alex back here. So Alex, if you want to go ahead and say hi, and then we'll jump into it.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm more than willing to answer any question about line haul. We can also talk about the Bears, the Blackhawks, college football, you name it. I won't go into politics, so we'll leave that alone, but more than willing to address any question that anybody might have. If you want to talk about Taylor Swift, I got 2 daughters. I can even talk about Taylor Swift.
Perfect. All right, Alex. Well, I'll let you kind of take it from here then.
Oh, okay, awesome. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of line haul. So look, all the different logistics spaces are really interesting, and it's a function of what matters to you and what makes the most sense for the given skill set that you have. I was in your shoes 6 years ago, 7 years ago, trying to figure out what space I wanted to get into. I remember listening to Spencer Patton when he first started these webinars back then. And I actually had a call with him, and he made a very compelling case about why to go into P&D. And I came away from that call saying that it was not the space for me. And then I, eventually launched my career into line haul. So let's talk about the pros and cons. So I'm going to start off with the pros, and then I'm going to talk about the cons, and then I'll talk about why I think the cons can be mitigated. And then if you want to, you can ask me questions about, how hard, how strong are the pros. So the pros in the FedEx universe, line haul is where the highest margins are. Bar none, your highest margins on a per revenue basis or a per company basis are going to be on the line haul space versus the P&D. But that's a function of the risk versus the reward, and that's something we can talk about in the cons. But in general, my worst margins in the last 5+ years I've been in business is 13%. My strongest margins have been over 25%. So, and I typically average on an annual basis about 20 to 22% per year. The other nice thing I like about line haul is that it's really conducive to remote ownership. That doesn't mean it's mailbox money. So let me make that clear. This is not mailbox money. I work in my business, and I have the business work for me on a daily basis. And I have certain functions that I allocate to myself that I handle on a daily basis. But that being said, I live in Denver. My operations are in Independence, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, and Olive Branch, Mississippi. So this is a job that you do not have to show up into the terminal on a daily basis. And unless you have a CDL, there is no point for you to show up into the terminal on a daily basis. Your truck drivers do not want to see you. Trust me. It's a very simple business to model. There's not a lot of moving parts to it. Okay. The business is a lot of it is fixed costs that you can model up very easily. And then everything else is really just a percentage of the revenue that you generate. So what I recommend to new investors is understand how we get paid, which is on a per mile basis, and then how to allocate all your expenses on a per mile basis. So that really gives you an idea on a cents per mile, what your profit margin is going to be and what your expected income is going to be in a cents per mile basis. So it's very, very simple to model. There's really only three significant expenses that you have. You have payroll, which is your most expensive part of your business. You have fuel, which 75 to 80% of it is going to get reimbursed by FedEx. And then you have maintenance costs, which you can mitigate a lot of that by depending on your maintenance plan and how you handle it. And then the business is really easy to scale. So like, as I said, I mean, a lot of the costs that you have in this business, you're going to have regardless if you're operating at 4 trucks or if you're operating at 20 trucks. So as you expand and grow and add more trucks, I guess you could say your cabinet or your SG&A or those costs that are embellished or endemic to the business as a whole just get spread out across more trucks. And so they take on a smaller and smaller portion of your revenue stream going forward. So it's easy to scale up, and then that generates a lot of economies in scale. So those are all the pros to this business. Okay. And why I think it's such a compelling place to be. Josh, did you have any questions or wanted to point out anything else?
No, I mean, I think that's what's important here is understanding, what are the things that people like, because, I think that's probably the easier part for a lot of people is to understand that side. And a lot of people don't even realize how high those margins can be. Thinking through how you can scale and all of the benefits of line haul. I think really what it comes down to is a lot of people see the pros and it's great, but they worry because it's a very unfamiliar type of industry to them. And so the cons kind of, or at least the fears can outweigh any decisions you might make in that direction. So I think the pros are evident, and a lot of when it comes to line haul is kind of thinking through those cons, those fears, how to address them. And so I think that's the part that I think a lot of people struggle with.
So, I mean, I think the number one con is most of us don't have a CDL. I mean, Josh, do you have a CDL? Brent and
no one in
Brent
my
behind
family. Yeah.
no one in my family, Brent behind the scenes doesn't have a CDL. I don't have a CDL. Have I thought about getting a CDL? Yes, I constantly talk about it. And my wife and I have conversations about me, taking 4 weeks to go off and get a CDL. And would it be nice? Yes. There's a woman up in Seattle that I have a tremendous amount of, or actually in Washington State, who have a tremendous amount of respect for. She's a great contractor who started off in P&D and then decided that, she wanted to get into Linehaul. So she actually got her CDL just so she could be able to relate with her drivers. Jen Parrish is phenomenal. And if you're ever in the Washington market, you should reach out and talk to her because, she is the salt of the earth and has a lot of advice. But that's the biggest scary thing is like, I don't have a CDL. So can I relate to my drivers? Do I understand what they're doing? And a lot of businesses that you're going to own as a small business owner, you are not going to be a subject matter expert in what that is going to be. Okay. Whether it's sales, whether it's manufacturing of wire harnesses, whether it's, making, plastic rubber duckies in China, you're not going to be the subject matter expert on making these plastic rubber duckies. Your job is to understand and know how to run this business most efficiently and most effectively. That's what your job is as a business owner. 2, it's expensive. Yes, I will not deny that owning Linehaul is a much more expensive business model and much more expensive than P&D. The average P&D step van probably costs somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. You probably can get a really good used step van for about $35,000. and you probably don't have to replace them as frequently as you do in line haul. In line haul, a typical team truck costs somewhere between $185 to $200,000, and a typical day cab costs somewhere between $145 and $165,000 brand new. And even if you're looking to buy them used, you're still looking to spend somewhere between $70 and $110,000. So these are really expensive vehicles that you're buying, pieces of equipment. But the great thing about them is that there's a lot of different ways to lease them. So we have Ryder, Penske, and REL, which is one of my favorites. Or there's a lot of different ways to finance them. There are major banks who will be in this market and like to finance rolling equity or rolling stock, which is what this is called, tractor trailers. So Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and BMO all have very large truck financing businesses. And then you have the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers like PACCAR, Cummins, Daimler, which uses Detroit, or Volvo, also have their own captive finance units, which will finance truck purchases. So you in general only need to put down maybe 10 to 15%, and you can finance the cost of the truck. And if you're on a dedicated run, you're able to model out what your expected expenses are going to be and your lease payments or your finance payments are versus what you expected revenue. And you'll have as long as you keep that truck staffed, you're going to have a really good idea of what your net income is going to be at the end of the year. And that goes back to the next con. Okay. So the next con is recruiting. It is harder to recruit in line haul than it is in P&D. In P&D, you can get somebody who has driving experience, put them through a driving school and say, hey, you're now a delivery van guy. In the line haul space, you need to have a CDL. Within the FedEx universe, to not have to go through driver training, you have to have a driver that has 1 year within the last 3 years of verifiable DOT employment history, or 5 years in the last 10 years of DOT employment history. Otherwise, they have to graduate from a FedEx approved school and go through an entry-level driver training program, which takes at a minimum of 90 days and generally takes about 120 days to go through. So it is harder to recruit, but luckily for us, you can either do the recruiting yourself, or you can be like me. I have my own internal recruiting person who handles all my recruiting needs, or you can use third-party vendors like Bright Flag, Route Recruiting, Recruiting for Success. There's a lot of third-party vendors out there who can assist you and will assist you in recruiting drivers. And there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. Like, there are some guys who do it through Facebook. There's some who do it through Indeed. Some do it through Zip, and some do it. Some do it through Craigslist. Like, some people have a lot of success with Craigslist. So there are a lot of different ways to recruit. Just understand that your primary job as a contractor is to recruit and to maintain your vehicles. So if you can solve those two issues, you're going to be a very successful contractor. Okay, the next con, it's risky. At the end of the day, you have a 55,000-pound vehicle or vehicle combination going down the highway. Okay. Your accidents, they're all big accidents. There's no like, oh, I just got a fender bender. No, if you bend somebody's fender, you're probably tearing the front of the truck off, or their truck off. Your truck is probably going to be in a good shape, but no, any accident that you have is going to be a large, risky accident. I can tell you that it took me a long time to learn that not all phone calls at night are bad phone calls. When I first got into the business, I was always worried about getting a phone call in the middle of the night from one of my managers or one of my drivers, and him telling me that, he's fallen asleep and he, got into an accident. Now, accidents happen. That's why you have insurance. That's why we go through this process of having safety training programs, and why we have, you do road tests with your drivers, you get your managers to do remedial training, and you try to get your drivers to drive a certain way and have certain processes and procedures when they're on the road so that you can mitigate and minimize these accidents as much as possible. Will you get into an accident? Yes. I've had I've had 3 catastrophic accidents. Knock on wood, I won't have any more. But in my 5+ years, I've had 3 bad accidents that, luckily no one was injured in, but, they were all scary incidences when they occurred. And I was bothered by them. I'll be honest. It's a challenge, but you know what? That's why we have insurance, and that's why you have safety training programs. And what you always want to be doing is, if you have a bad driver, don't worry. It's not worth the risk that he's going to get into an accident. It's better for you to get rid of him and try to replace him and take the risk of having a couple of declines and maybe losing revenue than potentially having an issue where you have a catastrophic accident. So remember that when you're doing this situation. Um, and then, at the end of the day, those are the biggest issues that you're gonna be challenged with as a contractor. But I think that they all can be mitigated. You can work with me or work with Rob Consultants and develop a better safety training program if that's what you're worried about. And if you're worried about the accidents, if you're worried about the recruiters, we can put you in touch with recruiters who can help you staff your position. Right now is actually a really good time to try to recruit drivers. We're in what we call a softer freight market for drivers. And so it's really easy actually to recruit drivers. I have more drivers than I know what to do with. I mean, they're like coming out of my ears. Um, trucks right now, it's actually a good market to actually buy trucks right now. It's not that bad. It's not that hard. There have been more challenging markets. Everything is an ebb and flow, but this is a good time to get into the space. Like I can tell you honestly, from my own self, I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to expand. I look at this as an opportunistic time right now for me to grow and expand and try to take on, more revenue streams.
Yeah, perfect. And so, I think there's a couple things I'll come back to, but right now you've kind of outlined these pros and cons, these columns. So you're kind of coming at it from a few years in. Now that this is the right fit for you. When you started, you had probably a similar sense of those pros and cons. You were looking at P&D too. What was it that made you compelled to enter Linehaul at that point? Like how did it all weigh out in your mind when you're making those initial decisions?
Honestly, I didn't want to have to go into the terminal on a daily basis and potentially jump into a delivery van.
Yeah.
Like, when I heard the stories like, oh, you just have to recruit. I mean, just always constantly have 4 or 5 drivers in your pipeline recruiting. And I'm like, I don't want that. That's like, how do I build a company culture? Like, I've worked really hard to build my company culture. Like, one of the biggest pride and joys, and I talked about this with you last week, was I just had 2 drivers who I submitted for a humanitarian award in 2022. So it's 2024. I submitted them for a humanitarian award with FedEx. These drivers have stayed with me for the last 2.5 years or 2+ years. And they just received recognition last week from FedEx for saving the lives for saving the lives of 2 different families in 2 different incidences. That's the kind of stuff that really, it's amazing to me, the individuals that we get to work with on a daily basis, how unbelievably amazing. I mean, how they're all, they're all heroes at the end of the day. And so my opportunity to recognize this and make sure that they are recognized by their wider community is amazing. And it just goes to show you, like, if you work really hard to treat your drivers well and you develop a really good culture, like, these guys will stick with you. Like, I have drivers who've been with me ever since I founded my company. They haven't left, so that's going on 5+ years. So that's, to me, is the big difference between Linehaul and P&D, because you go into P&D, you talk to any contractor, there's very few times where they're going to have somebody that's been with them for 5+ years. Does it happen? Yes. But more often than not, they're changing their role, they're turning over their entire workforce every 6 months.
Yeah. And that's very true. Yeah, there's a lot more change and turnover. It's more often that you see drivers on the P&D side that are viewing it as, the job for today or for this month, as opposed to a lot of line haul guys are viewing it as a career. So you do get the opportunity to bring some of those people in that are in it for years and really find that talent, nurture it. And it's a huge differentiator, a really different feeling in terms of the culture that you're able to create and sustain.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but at one point in time, I had a son, his mom, and his stepdad all working for me. And he was trying to get his real dad to work for me as well.
Oh, that's great.
Uh, you know,
I'm sure you did a team run with his mom and his dad, right?
exactly. But it's just kind of funny. Like, if you do right by your drivers and you treat them well, they're going to give you a lot of loyalty. That is the one thing that I do like about this business. You treat your drivers well, you give them respect, you give them loyalty, you treat them fairly. They are going to repay it back in full 10 times over.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's always the case, but it's true when, you know, you get more of that kind of exponential effect when they stay. You get to continue to invest back in them and then see those returns over, you know, a number of years. And I think what it comes down to when you know, whether it's P&D or line haul, a lot of the things that people worry about, they worry that they don't have the skill set for. There are vendors and partners, you know, tons of them, that you should basically rely on them to kind of fill in any gaps that you have. So if you think there's, you know, 80% of it that you're comfortable with, there is going to be someone else that you can partner with for that remaining 20% to get you across the line.
Yeah, I mean, when I was trying to do recruiting on my own, which I will tell you that me personally, that is not my strong suit. I reached out to Tony Tovey at Bright Flag, and she did my recruiting for a good 6 months to 8 months before I eventually decided that there was other things I needed to do within my company, and I hired an HR manager whose part of her job is to do recruiting. But I mean, I used third-party vendors, and I know there's guys who've used Mitch Adams and had a lot of success. Jen Parr. I mean, there are a lot of third-party recruiters. So if recruiting is not your strong suit, there's somebody to go out there. If scheduling and dispatch is not your strong suit, there are apps to go out there. You can go talk to My Ground Force or go talk to Holiday Tech or EBO Pro. If you're not good at back office finance, well, one, QuickBooks makes it really easy, but I guarantee you can talk to your accountant, your CPA, and they will do it for you. Or there are third-party vendors that out there that can do your back off your bookkeeping for you. I mean, there is somebody out there. So figure out what you're good at, what you enjoy, and what makes you tick and what makes this business tick for you. And then you can focus on that area and then let other people or let other vendors help you out with those other areas that you're not very strong at. And at the end of the day, your goal is to get to the point where the business is working for you so you can constantly try to expand and scale your business up larger and larger. Because as we talked about, there are significant economies of scale. So, you know, I am always going to spend a certain amount of money on QuickBooks a year to do my finances, but to do my accounting and back office keeping. That's a fixed cost. Okay. So if I'm able to spread it over 15 trucks or 30 trucks, it's the same cost. It just means that I have higher margins when I'm spreading it over 30 trucks.
Yeah. Yep. 100% agree. And I think the real thing here that we want you to be able to think through is you shouldn't forget about the cons. Like, there are obviously, you should understand the downsides and the risks of any industry, but we want you to see that wherever you're going, whether it's P&D or line haul, there are ways to mitigate them. So think more about which of the two gets you more excited, which of them fits in terms of your lifestyle and the things that you think you'll be capable of on a day-to-day basis. But those kind of risk and gap areas, there are ways to close those gaps. So it's all about having eyes wide open, and then understanding that there are always going to be ways to close the gaps on areas that are challenges for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. So so that's the chunk of the content that we wanted to cover today. I'm going to get to Q&A in just a second. I want to go through a couple of upcoming events and new listings. So while I'm talking, if there are any other questions that people want to submit, we'll get to those in just a second. And a reminder that the Q&A button is the best place at the bottom to find those. So 2 new listings this week, both P&D, ironically. But the first one is out of Tennessee. It is 15 P&D routes at 1.75 million. This one has a 25% margin, very high for P&D, 1 manager, and there's some assumable truck debt as well, if that is something you're looking for. The last one is also out of Tennessee. This is 19 P&D routes at 1.5 million. This one has 2 managers, 2 spare trucks, and those managers are full-time managers to help with whatever you need. And again, there is also some assumable truck debt. So if you're looking in Tennessee, we got 2 different options in different parts of the state. So reach out to our team. Both of those are pickup and delivery. We can give you all the details. You can reach out directly on our site or to us at info@routeconsultant.com. Now, a couple of upcoming events to highlight. First is, if you are still trying to decide on this space, still kind of evaluating, we have a new investor summit that we host at our office in Nashville. You can sign up. It's on demand to get access to all of the digital content. And then we do workshops a couple of times every quarter. The next one's actually coming up on March 28th. So if you sign up and go ahead and jump into that digital course right now, you still have a little bit of time to sign up for that March 28th event in our office in Nashville. And really, these are events that are designed to teach you as much as we can in a short period of time, and then enable you to come in person, ask questions, go through any kind of lingering doubts you have, and go through a couple of custom listings, talk to our team in person, so that coming out of that day, you'll feel really confident moving into the space. Or it could potentially be that you find that, after doing that new investor summit, that it is not the right fit for you. That's still a win, we think, for everybody involved, because that, you spent a day instead of spending a few years to find out that fact. Now we also have happy hours coming up across the country. Those happen periodically throughout the year. I think the next one might be in St. Louis. But you can go to our site and we have those listed. They're completely free to attend, and it's a great way where we'll come into your neck of the woods. And if you see us coming, you can go ahead and register, and we'll be there, and you can show up, free food, free drinks, and you get to meet the team and meet other contractors in your area. Last one I'm always going to remind you on is we've got our expo coming up the first week of August. And this is the big contractor event that we host every year, where contractors from across the country, P&D, Linehaul, all different industries, all come together in one place in Dallas, Texas, where free to attend, free food, free drinks, free content. It's multiple days where we are just inundating you with information on what's happening in the space, letting you meet every vendor in the space. But importantly, the only thing you got to sign up for is your hotel room. And those blocks do sell out fast. So if you're trying to go ahead and lock in a hotel room at a certain rate, you should go ahead and register now. Those will continue to sell out over these next couple of months. Okay, so I've seen a few questions come in here. So I'm going to jump on and go through these. So the first one here, and I think there's a couple of different answers on this, Alex, is what would you say is a typical out-of-pocket expense to get started in this business? So I guess let's start with two different ways. Let's say if you were coming in through something like Build a Ground Biz, starting from the ground up, what would you pay? And then we can talk about it.
So I think that there's going to be there's a flat fee that you need to pay whether you do it anyway. Okay. So whether or not you're buying a business or you're starting it up and you're going to go build a ground biz, at the end of the day, you're going to need to spend probably somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 with a lawyer to organize your company, register it in whatever state you're going to want to register it, pay the registration fees, because you have to register your company as either an S Corp or as a C Corp. You cannot do LLCs. So S Corps and C Corps are generally more expensive. You are going to need to have some kind of legal advice on it, because you actually have to have bylaws. You have to have organization documents. You need to actually have a recorder and a secretary who keeps your records for you, because you have to submit these files to the state on an annual basis to stay in good standing. And FedEx is going to require you to provide proof to them that you are an entity in good standing with whatever state you're organized in. Then if you happen to be like me and I live in Colorado and my company is organized in Illinois and I do business in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi, that means that I need to have what we call a foreign entity registration, or what I really love is Tennessee, I think, actually calls it an alien registration license.
Yeah.
So you have to have one of those. And so that's going to cost you some more money. So figure that you're going to spend somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 on legal fees just to get off the ground and running. Okay. From there, then I recommend that you want to have on hand at any time at least 2 weeks worth of payroll. Okay. So depending on what business you're going to be in, you should always have 2 weeks worth of payroll. Why that number? For me, it was always the sense of like, this would pay for, not for payroll, because we get paid like clockwork every Friday. And so you don't have to worry about that. What you do have to worry about is that you're probably going to get a draw from your payroll provider on Thursday to make your distributions to your employees on Friday. And that's the same day that you actually get reimbursed by FedEx. So that's why you need to have 1 week's worth of payroll. The second week's worth of payroll, in my mind, is, oh my gosh, something just happened. Like you had an accident and you need to get a new truck, or you had, it's pretty much, you had a major mechanical failure. Like I'll give you a horror story. Okay. So I became a contractor in February. And in March, I had a team run on a really old team truck. And this is why I don't do this anymore. I learned my lesson really quickly. He was in the middle of I-95 on his way up to New Jersey, and he blew a rod. Okay. So he threw one of the pistons in the engine, went right through the block of this engine and destroyed the engine. So not only am I out of, not only did I not finish the run and get paid for it, but I'm out of truck right now. And I have two drivers stranded in the middle of nowhere. Okay. So I had to make a decision about, okay, what am I doing? And I had to get my drivers back. I had to get the load rescued. Luckily I contacted FedEx. They rescued the load. They took care of that part. Okay. Then I arranged for my drivers to hop on a Greyhound bus and come back, which I had to pay out of pocket for. So I paid for that. I had to figure out what I'm going to do with this truck. So I got a wrecking company that I had to pay for, tow it to a place where they auction off the vehicle as is. And then I had to go out and acquire a new truck. So I put a down payment of, 1 week's payroll down for a new truck. And I only missed 2 runs out of the whole thing. But that's why I recommend always having 2 weeks of payroll on hand at all times, just for that catastrophic event. And moral to the story, don't ever run a team run on a truck without a warranty. Okay. That way the OEM takes care of you if you have any mechanical issues.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you don't really want to have a team truck out there with more than 500 or 600, with more than about 500,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
Uh, Solo trucks, different story, but moral of the story. But yeah, so that's my thought process. So, your startup costs are going to be literally the only thing you need to do is have the legal fees. But I recommend, depending on how big of an operation you decide to buy or you're going to decide to start off with, then you need to have 2 weeks worth of payroll on hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of those legal startup fees and then the emergency funds, basically the just in case for payroll, just in case for trucks, any of the traumatic events that could happen. You've got, like Alex said, FedEx pays like clockwork. So you get paid every week. This isn't to cover any of those expenses. It's more of just to protect yourself from what could happen. Now, I will say the other side of it is if you're not buying an existing business, then you do have to think through the costs of buying new vehicles or use whichever way you go, or financing or lease. But
Yeah.
that is an expense that you have to factor in because it's not a trivial amount, as Alex said. Like, especially if, even if it's just 2 runs, those 2 trucks, which are pretty expensive assets. So that is going to be a big part of it.
I'd agree. If you're actually going to go the build a ground biz route, which I don't recommend as a brand new person, unless you're coming from the trucking industry as an owner operator, it's a different story. In that situation, I think you can go the build a ground biz, but there's no user manual to being a FedEx contractor. So my recommendation, and this is what I did, was buy a good business at a fair price. You buy a good business, you can learn on that business, learn from the manager that's already in place, learn from the seller, because the seller is usually going to stick around for 60 to 90 days or give you advice, or you can actually enter into a contract where he sticks around longer. But that's, you're going to learn from that person. But if you're starting off from scratch, I mean, there are a lot more things that you need to pay for. You need to buy your own ELDs. Those are about $800 a pop. You're going to need, you can either buy better devices or lease better devices. I do the lease route, so it's not an upfront cost, it's just a monthly charge, though I am tied up into a 3-year contract on my better devices. But there are all these little ancillary things. But it all boils back down to like 2 weeks worth of payroll is going to get you up off the ground, up and running, and be able to cover all those costs.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just to briefly touch on, if you haven't heard of it, FedEx has a site called Build a Ground Biz that are essentially free runs. Now, the thing about those is that typically those are runs that no one in the current network wanted, or there's some other reason that they're up for free on FedEx's site. You're not going to really know much of the history. You're not going to have any drivers included. You're not going to have any trucks included. So like Alex said, it's a way that you can get in for free, but there's a lot of costs associated with it. And it's a really difficult uphill battle if you don't know exactly what you're walking into. And so that's a way that you can expand once you're in the FedEx network, or if you have trucking experience and you know exactly how to think about and value what those listings look like. It could be a way that you add to your existing portfolio. But I'd say the easiest and best step for most people to get into Linehaul is to find one that they can acquire from an existing contractor. You don't just inherit the assets, you also inherit the knowledge and experience from that previous contractor to kind of get a sense of what those runs are like, what those drivers are like, what the managers are like, what the terminal is like, and what they should expect from a volume perspective. So there's a lot that you miss that is kind of a hidden cost if you come for one of those free routes.
Yeah.
Now, this question here from Jim, basically asking, are we going to do a similar type of conversation as we did today, but with the P&D contractor? So Jim, next week, actually, we're going to have Marlon Campbell on, who is a current P&D contractor, kind of talking through his story and why he got into P&D, how he grew. So it'll be a perfect kind of backdrop and secondary conversation for you as you're trying to compare the two. So we'll have that next week on this webinar. Okay, so this one's here from Eugene. So if you have an unassigned route, how does that kind of work? Is there a base amount of hours that you have the driver hired for, whether they do a load or not? How do you think about paying for that?
Yeah. So right now, the way the URR works, or the unassigned run rotation works, is that you have tractors, whether it's the AM rotation or the PM rotation or the team rotation. So each hub has different rotations. The smaller stations generally don't have team rotations, and they'll usually either have a AM rotation or a PM, or just maybe they just have the PM rotation. But if in the hub area, you'll have AM trucks and PM trucks, and those generally run, well, by the contract, they're supposed to run from midnight to noon, and then from noon to midnight. Realistically, they run about 3 or 4 a.m. to about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then from 3 or 4 in the afternoon to 3 or 4 in the morning. Okay, that's just how it works. I mean, versus the contract, what it says and how it actually operates. The team rotation is pretty much on a daily basis. Most hubs usually have what they call hot loads. And so you actually, if you're number 1, 2, or 3 on the rotation at that point in time, they want you to have your team in the hub usually around 3 in the morning, so that you're taking out any hot loads that need to go, like, be a direct to someplace. So like, say, you get a load in Memphis that has to be in Chicago by the PM sort. They'll say, okay, you're going out, or maybe may even say you have to be there before the end of the morning sort. So they'll give you the load at 3 a.m. and you're a bullet going straight up to Chicago, and doing that drive in 8 hours. But in general, what happens is that we're actually in the transition right now where we're moving to a 5-day URR schedule. So historically, you've had to provide a tractor and a driver 7 days a week. Even if they weren't utilized 7 days a week, you had to provide them. Now we're moving to a 5-day schedule where your drivers are going to be assigned a certain number of days where they have to be available to run. The idea is this is to make it, a little bit more efficient and more improve operational efficiency. But in general, what I do, and this is not what everybody does, this is what I do and what works for my business. I guarantee my drivers a certain number of miles as long as they show up to work. So if they have to come into the office, or not into the office, but come into what I call the office, come into their truck, they have to log into Omnitrax, conduct a pre-trip inspection, check in with MTA. And if they don't get utilized, I usually release them back after about 2 hours, and that say, hey, you're going home, and I'll pay them for that day's worth of work. This way, my drivers are going to remain loyal. They know I'm taking care of them, but they're also available for me to utilize them, and I'm not taking declines. I usually talk to FedEx and find out what their situation is. When do they think they're going to need the unassigned run rotation? Because sometimes, they'll get done with the rotation at 6 a.m. and other times they won't get done with it until 11 a.m. So in general, it's a conversation between you and dispatch, or realistically your manager and dispatch, about trying to figure out. Like this morning, one of my unassigned solos, had to go do a rescue. There was a truck that broke down en route to its bump, so we got dispatched out to go rescue those trailers and fulfill the run. Another one was moving equipment, and so at this time of year, what we're actually doing, we're returning a lot of the rented trailers that FedEx rented for peak season. We're returning them back to the rental facility, and so we're doing a lot of equipment moves. So that's something I'm doing today. Did today. I also did a rail yard run. So I moved stuff from my terminal to the rail yard where it's going to get put onto rails and shipped off to the West Coast. So these are some of the kind of things you'll do with your URR. But in general, what works for me is to guarantee them a certain number of days of work. for a certain number of pay. And what I do is I treat it as a floor. So, they're guaranteed a minimum of 2,000 miles a week. If they run more than 2,000 miles a week, they get paid like that. But otherwise, they get paid as if they had run 2,000 miles for the week.
Right. Okay, so I think hopefully that helps answer your question on all of that and clarify what you had on that. Now, so talking about growth, so we've talked about Build a Ground Biz. We talked about how that's an option, and you can always purchase and acquire more runs. But what are the other ways you can grow in this space?
So, I mean, there's two other main areas the way you can grow within the space. I mean, obviously, you can talk to your terminal manager and or your hub manager and pick up runs that way. It's a little bit less common right now. Most of the stuff is going through what they call an RFI process, or request for information process, which is similar to what Build a Ground Biz is like. So they'll post that they're awarding growth opportunities in a hub area. And so they'll give the hub area the opportunity to bid on those runs. And if no one bids on them, then they'll post them on Build a Ground Biz. But in general, they'll usually post them. Usually the cycle is between September and October is when they're posting these growth opportunities. So they'll post them in the hub area, and then you can try to get them through submitting an RFI process to your terminal manager or hub manager. The other ways to grow is to try to acquire spots. So spots are work for spare tractors that's typically not on your A1 or your A2. And so when you think of a customer spot in the P&D world, you have a delivery van showing up at like a Foot Locker site or something like that, and they pick up 200 packages that are getting shipped out. Well, if it's in excess of 200 packages, that's generally something that needs a trailer or a box truck, depending on the number of packages and the size of the packages. So in those situations, we might spot a trailer at a location, and then we'll let the customer fill that trailer up, and then we'll exchange trailers with it and bring it back to FedEx, where those packages then get sorted and put into other trailers to get shipped across the country. So say FedEx has a customer named Acme Frog Manufacturers, and they make plastic frogs, and they're a big customer of FedEx, and FedEx, they estimate that they're going to do 50 trailers a day. Well, FedEx is then going to have, 5 or 6 contractors who are going to shuttle trailers back and forth between this factory where they're making all these plastic rubber, frogs, and taking them to the terminal and then getting them shipped across the country. So that's what our spots are. And there's a lot of successful contractors who really just focus on the spots versus doing the stuff that I typically do, which is the over-the-road business. So that's the other way to grow. Then you can acquire runs. Sometimes there's opportunities where contractors are failing, either for safety or for availability or for service. And in those situations, there's usually some opportunities for where FedEx will either eventually take away the runs and then post them as opportunities within the hub area for other contractors to grow through them, or they might try to encourage one contractor to sell to another contractor. So there's always opportunities once you're in the network to grow. You can grow organically or grow through acquisition, and I've done both. I've currently have 6 unassigned runs. 6, yeah, 6 unassigned runs right now. And I've converted 6 unassigned runs into dedicated runs, or no, actually more than that, probably 8 unassigned runs into dedicated runs over my lifetime in being in the FedEx space.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to understand is there are a lot of different mechanisms for growth. And once you're in the space, the hardest step into line haul is the first one. I think that once you're in the network, you'll see a lot of other opportunities for growth in different places, but oftentimes it's just getting in that first one and finding the right first step.
And you'll be amazed at the number of backroom deals that happen. Oh, you don't like your Kalamazoo, Michigan? Well, I got this Oak Hill. You want to trade your Kalamazoo for my Oak Hill? I'll take that. They're similar miles, and you'll just, get a handshake deal done. I mean, it's amazing. It's crazy.
Just tell FedEx and they changed on the contract. That's yeah. So here's one from William. I don't know, how much have you heard about, do you think team runs are here to stay? You think there's any world where FedEx would move towards only solos? How do you see that feature playing out?
So as long as FedEx guarantees 2-day delivery on the ground network, teams are never going to go away. Okay. So the only way that the 2-day delivery ground guarantee works is through teams. You can't use a solo driver, and you can't use rail to try to get freight from New York to California within 2 days. Can you get it there from New York to California on ground by 2 days? No, but you can get there pretty close. And going from anywhere from, like, if you go into a FedEx ship office and you actually look at their network map of where they guarantee delivery by, you get an idea of why the teams are so important. So if you want to go from California to Chicago or California to Memphis and you want to get it there 2 day, it's a team. It's not going by rail. Rail takes too long because it takes a day to load the rail. Rail moves slower than trucks do. Trucks are, generally 65 miles an hour. Rail is much, much slower than that. And then it takes a day to unload the rail. And then you got to then you got to do drayage, which usually takes a day to get out of the rail facility, to get to where it needs to go. So rail is usually like a 5 day kind of thing. So anything that's 2 to 3 days or even less needs to go by truck or needs to go by air. And air is really, really expensive. I mean, the only thing that FedEx is shipping by air is pharmaceuticals, really, really expensive, like high value items. Everything else is going on the ground network. And that's where FedEx makes its bread and butter. So teams are not going away. Are there as many needs for teams? No, because they're building a lot more of these regional sort facilities to help out with some of the to help out with some of the areas, but they still need teams. Like, you can't go from Memphis to Minneapolis without teams. Can't go from, you really can't go from Chicago to Memphis without teams. Can't go from Chicago to New York without teams. You can't go from Chicago to LA without teams. So all these things, to get across the country, I mean, at the end of the day, we're a big country. It's 1,700 miles from Memphis to Rialto, and it's probably, I think it's like 2,035 miles from Rialto to Chicago. Those are things that a team can do in less than 2 days. You cannot do it with a solo driver.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's just realities of the network. I think that unless we hear that the network is going to categorically change in a way that is different than everything that they've said so far, then teams are here to stay, at least in the current form.
Now, do they need as many teams? I mean, team ebbs and flows based off of the customer mix within the FedEx universe. Wherever they have customers and where they have where the demand is will generate, how much of the freight needs to be moved on teams versus needs moved on solos. But if you have a distributor in Georgia that's selling products to the West Coast, I mean, at the end of the day, that's being moved by teams. It's just the way it works.
Perfect. All right. Now, so just as a last question here, it's not even a question, I'm just addressing. Eugene, I saw, basically asking about mentorship. There are ways where you can work directly with Alex. So if you have questions on that, reach out to our team the way we've suggested before, info@routeconsultant.com, where we can have you set up, we can set up a conversation where wherever you are in the journey, Alex and our team can help you out through that and be a dedicated mentor.
More than willing to help out, Eugene. I've worked with I've worked with current contractors, and I've worked with guys who are looking to get into business. I can tell you that this has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. My background is I came from the military. I worked on Wall Street for a number of years and then started off as a trucking company owner. And I've really enjoyed this experience. And as I said earlier, I'm continuing constantly trying to grow. I'm hoping to pick up some additional runs this year. So we'll see, fingers crossed.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So Alex, thank you so much for being here, for answering all these questions and providing your expertise. It's always a pleasure to have you.
No, thanks, Josh. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So, and for everybody who's on here, thanks for being here. And like Alex said, Linehaul every 2 weeks. We've got a P&D one next week. So whatever your interest, will be here on Wednesdays, and see you next time.